Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Searching the Sacred. Lisa, Steph, and Jason with you as normal. And we are in the middle of a season 12. This is episode 4. And we are talking about how the assignment hasn't changed. That although the world tends to change and different people come into power and different regimes and different things happen, and there's this tragedy over here and there's this illness over there, and we lived through a pandemic, and there's so much going on. The Bible seems to have a very clear through line of justice and love, and that has never changed. It's never wavered. Now, how we go about implementing it maybe is different, but the assignment is still the same. And so what we're doing in this season is trying to look at various passages where we can see the consistency of the assignment and the nuances of it, and how, either Jesus or God or the prophets or whoever is doing these writings is communicating this assignment. And so today we're going to be diving into Micah 6, which many of you may have, or some of you may have a pillowcase, or maybe your grandma did, that had Micah 6:8 on it. But we're going to be starting in verse 1, and we want you to hear the context that leads to verse 8, because there's kind of an interesting back and forth that happens leading up to the verse that will likely be familiar to many of us. So with that, Micah 6:8 verse 1. No, Micah 6 verse 1.
I'm going to read from the Robert Alter translation. Listen, pray to what the Lord has said. Rise, plead a case before the mountains, and let the hills hear your voice. Hear, O mountains, the case of the Lord, and you mighty pillars of the earth. For the Lord has a case against his people, and with Israel he would dispute. My people, what have I done to you, and in what did I do you in? Testify against me. For I brought you up from the land of Egypt, and from the house of slaves I redeemed you, and sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. My people, recall, pray, what Balak, king of Moab, devised, and what Balaam, son of Beor, answered him. From Shittim to Gilgal, that the Lord's bounties would be known. With what shall I come before the Lord, bowed to the Most High God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with yearling calves? Is the Lord pleased with thousands of rams, myriads of streams of oil? Shall I give him my firstborn for my trespass, the fruit of my loins for my offense? It was told to you, man, what is good, and what the Lord demands of you, only doing justice and loving kindness and walking humbly with your God.
Okay. What translation was that, Lisa?
Alter.
I liked in verse 2, my translation said, the Lord has a controversy with his people. Can you remind me what Alter said? I noticed that it was different.
Has a case against his people.
So the Alter translation is more clear, I think, for what's going on in this little section, which is that it is structured and phrased as if it is a court case. So I just want to highlight that for the listeners, and then we'll talk about it and think about the implications of it. But verse 1, Micah's talking, and Micah says, okay, hear what the Lord says. And so then it's the Lord talking. Arise and contend before the mountains and the face of the mountain. So God is inviting God's people to stand up and plead their case with the mountains as witnesses and with the hills hearing their voice. And then Micah is saying, now hear, O mountains, the Lord's controversy, the Lord's case against the people. So the mountains and the hills are bearing witness to both what God is saying and what the people are saying. And verse 3, then God is talking first. O my people, what have I done to you? How have I wearied you? How have I grieved you? When I'm the one who brought you out of Egypt, when I redeemed you, when I sent you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, remember what happened when Balak, how have I wearied you? Here's the history. Then in verse 6, the people are talking and saying, well, how should we come before you, God? What do you want from us? Do you want 10,000 rivers of oil? Do you want this fruit of do you want our child? What do you want? Do you want our firstborn? What do you want from us? And then Micah talks again in verse 8 of, he has already shown you, God has already shown you humans what is required, and here's what it is. And that's the verse that's often on pillows. So I just want to highlight that structure of God's talking and the people are talking and the mountains and hills are bearing witness, kind of leading into verse 8. So I'm curious kind of what rose up for us as we heard that, as we thought about that today, or maybe we've noticed or thought about that before. This is a verse that comes up in 40 Orchards conversations.
I love the energy of this. It feels very dramatic. It's not long-winded, right? Like, I think some of it feels very much like the end of Job, right? When Job's like, kind of like, all right, well, who are you? Where are you? Like, show up. And like, there's like 3 chapters of like, where were you when I set the foundations of the earth? Where were you when I sent the billy goat up into the mountains? And where were you when I determined like when the seas were going to crash into the shore? And it goes on and on and on and on. Whereas this is like 3 verses of, it's so short. It's, I brought you out of Egypt. I redeemed you from a house of slavery. I gave you Aaron, Moses, and Miriam. And I want to talk about Miriam because I think that's an interesting piece that we probably haven't focused on. And then he reminds him of what Balak and Balaam, that whole thing. And then from Shittim to Gilgal, which I'm sure you have a wonderful explanation for, it probably just means from like the entire expanse of where they were going. And it's like, period, end of it. Like, there it is. It's like 4 things, right? It's, I got you out of slavery. I gave you some leadership. Remember what happened when another king tried to come at you. And then from this place to this place, I've been in charge. Like, get off my back, right? I love the succinctness of it because it just gives it a bunch of energy. And I think it's fascinating that Micah's the one who summarizes it with the pillowcase verse in verse 8. It's not like God saying it, even though we could all say it's God saying it through the prophet, but in the courtroom, God's not the one saying, I've required justice, loving kindness, and mercy. It's and to walk humbly. It's Micah summarizing all of that for us.
I'm looking for my timeline. That's what I was reaching over to get. Because as you're naming that succinctness, it also just strikes me for like what I would want God, if I'm having this court case with God, what I would expect God to bring up is the righteousness or lack of righteousness in my own life or in my generation even. And what God brings up of like Balak and Balaam and being freed from Egypt, the idea, like Moses was probably alive somewhere between like 1500 and 1400 BC. So like so somewhere in that range of 14 to 1500 BC is like when the people would have been freed from Egypt. Balak and Balaam is 40 years from that because that's while the people are still in the wilderness before they cross over. That's what God brings up as like, how dare you say I've wearied you when I did that for you? Micah is written somewhere around, this timeline doesn't have Micah on it. I think somewhere around in the 700s BC. So like 800 years later. So like that's significant to me when I think about what God is asking us to look towards for God's faithfulness, because I can look around at our modern society and be like, where the heck are you, God? I've got a case against you because 2025 does not look the way I want it to look. And this would be like God coming back and being like, yeah, but remember what I did in 1200.
Or maybe, can I put it a little differently?
Sure.
So when I was working at Bethel, it's a Swedish Baptist institution that has a lot of privilege and power in the area of Christianity that it operates in. It was founded by a group of persecuted Swedes who were persecuted by the Lutheran Church and were not given freedom to practice their faith. And so they escaped Sweden in order to come to the US to establish a life, a school, a way of living, and worshiping. It would be like if Bethel were to be like, where are you, oh God? Like, why has this happened to us? And then God to say, don't you remember when I helped you get out of Sweden? Like, not remember when I established you in America, and not when I helped you rise to prominence within Christian higher ed, not when I helped expand this building to make sure that we had the sciences and the business center. But instead it was like, you remember when I rescued you from death? That's the moment that we'll go back to. Not all the King David stuff, not all the Solomon stuff, not all the prominence stuff, but we're going to go back to the liberation stuff. We're going to go back to the wilderness journey stuff. That's where you have evidence of my presence, which I think is fascinating, that it's through hardship, wilderness, out of slavery, liberation. That's what God's pointing to. You're muted.
Oopsie. Your point there that's important to notice is God could have chosen other moments in history to go to.
Right.
God could have chosen, remember when we built the temple under Solomon?
Yeah.
Remember when David reigned? And God doesn't go back to any of those points. God goes back to the liberation story at this point. And so that should raise the question of, why is that the reference point to remember at this point of their history and the court case that's happening for how the people have gone wrong? And how does what we remember affect how we see who God is and what our role is in this world, and like what part of the story we go back to?
Mm-hmm.
Lisa, what are you thinking about?
I don't know that I find it so. I don't know. I haven't really formulated it yet. I'm just gonna let it be for a minute. I don't know yet.
I love that. Well, I love that Lisa's going to marinate, and then all of a sudden it's just going to be like,
and then there'll be a mic drop.
Yep, exactly. I can't wait.
We have expectations of you, Lisa.
You know, come back into the mic.
We'll see what happens.
No. You know what we call that in the business? We call that a teaser.
But I feel like I'm confronted by this a lot in the Hebrew scriptures, and it is a challenge for how to bring it forward but this generational communal mindset that is very different than how I live. And the challenge for bringing it forward is to say, we are not living it's because of the time and space distance. Like, we are not Israel here. We are not a people with a land who have been told to have a theocracy as a part of a way of living in a land where the land is now at risk because of the way they are not living according to the laws of that theocracy. That's a very particular thing happening in the prophets. So we have to be careful how we pull that forward. And also, as we're careful about how we pull it forward, there's a lot of challenge inside of it of, how do I see my life inside the whole of humanity? How do I see, here's how I think of it a lot with Israel, is like, Israel here is being given this language of like, all of the people are talking to God like, well, what do you want, God? Should I give my firstborn? Like, should I give 10,000 rivers of oil? And probably there are people in that community who wouldn't say that. There are probably people in that community who would be like, oh my gosh, stop talking. Like, God's told us what to do. We're doing it. We're like, who are faithful, who are in it. And I think about the way that I don't want to get lumped into the church, for instance, and what the church is saying to God, because I am already thinking differently, and how it's a challenge for me to allow myself to be lumped with people saying this kind of thing to God, and wonder like where I would be in it and how I would feel defensive of being lumped in, if that makes sense. I want my individual acts to matter more than it seems to matter here, when God is talking so much about communal goodness and communal justice.
I feel like the whole well, I'm curious like who brought the case. Like if it was God initiating the conversation or if it was the people initiating the conversation. Like if they're asking God to prove something or if God is saying you're messing up. Because I think that's two different energies towards like what's happening, which I'm sure Micah probably is addressing some of that prior to this moment. But it also makes me think about there's like and maybe this is just because we had a conversation about it this morning of I don't know, maybe Steph, you can explain it better than I can with like mirrorism of like the using the two ends of the spectrum to describe the whole of the whole thing. It feels like a little bit in that, like in talking about like like I literally brought you up from the land of Egypt from the house of slaves. And I gave you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. Like that feels like I did like this huge thing and you got people. Like there's a spectrum of things that like what that should call to mind, like is not just those moments, but all the moments in between.
Mm.
Like it wouldn't just make you think about only about the liberation from Egypt. Because if that was the case, that's what we should still be talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not like, but like it is like the memory of like, oh yeah, there's a lot in between. So like even thinking about like if we want to hinge it on like Jesus's death and resurrection, everything that's come in between, which I would be very interested in like what we would say where like God is acting in between those two things. But then I like, and then continuing to read, it's even like there is like an individual thing of like, should I come before him with burnt offerings and calves? Like that is something that's like within a person's ability to do. But then into the thing where like a single person could not bring thousands of rams and
Mm-hmm.
streams of oil. That is the communal. So it also encompasses no matter where you are. Like it's like both a realistic ask and like over the top crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this passage has a lot of those things happening of like it's not just these individual things. It's like there's a lot happening and you're swimming in it. So like Micah doesn't have to lay out the whole land. Like you're swimming in it. That's just like it feels like it hits all those things. And it's like this well, it is Micah like succinctly stating, I don't know that it's not God. Like if we're thinking of the prophet as the person who's bringing God's voice forward, it kind of feels like when you get to that moment, like this is what God demands of you is only doing justice, loving kindness, and walking humbly. Like all the other stuff is it's almost like the history is almost like not you're not doing it. It's not a quid pro quo. You're not doing it because God's not acting on behalf of you because you're so good. And God's also not acting. Like, I don't know. Like, it feels like there's just a lot of different things, but I can see where folks land on verse 8 as a pillow verse in lots of ways, because that does feel like, yeah, that's a pretty succinct thing. How we read that, like how we read those actions and what they mean, probably not the same for everybody. But I do get like the draw towards like succinctly. It doesn't feel like God's ever been about the sacrifice. Like that's been the only reason. It's like what people want it to be. Like we want it to be like, well, if I go to church and I give my tithe and I do all these things, then I'm blessed. I've got it all together. And that is not that's not how it works. But like we really would like it to work that way. I mean, that would make it easier.
Yeah.
There's
There's a few things on what you're saying, Lisa, I think is probably worth unpacking. So one is this idea of merism that exists in Hebrew, which is when two ends of a spectrum are joined with an and in order for us to think about the whole spectrum. And what happens is Greek thought really and rationalism, Age of Enlightenment, like as time went on, humans became much more binary thinkers. So we read and as a binary instead of a spectrum. And to recognize that wouldn't have existed previous to those Stoic philosophers and previous to the Age of Enlightenment, that people would have even read the word and differently. And that in the Bible, there's lots of circumstances of like God created the heavens and the earth. Like they would have thought of heavens as sky and earth as land. And so there's a way of heavens and earth, meaning everything from the sky to like, it's the spectrum of heavens and the earth. The young and the old will prophesy. Well, that means everybody will prophesy. That's the book of Joel. But we do it in English. The best example in English is like, I searched high and low for my missing item. We don't mean only high and only low. We're using a merism as a way of saying, I searched everywhere. And so the question then, when we are seeing ands in scripture, when is it maybe a merism that we haven't recognized? Where is the and telling us something to see in a spectrum? So this idea of like, I freed you from Egypt and I gave you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. How are those two ends of a spectrum, perhaps, of I liberated you from an empire and I gave you people to guide you? And how might that and feel different if we see it in that way? So we should come back to that and talk about it. I also want to name what you're saying about like the context for the court case, which in Micah 1, really what Micah is about is it is predicting the destruction of Israel and Judah both. And it has a verse like Micah 1:9 says, her wound is incurable. And I think we don't tend to think of God as ever saying something is incurable. We always want the chance to turn. And the prophets are often giving us a chance to turn. The prophets are often saying, hey, you've gotten off track, get back on track. And the idea, like in Hebrew, teshuvah gets translated as repentance, but it really means to turn, like re-aim towards the right target. But sometimes the prophets are like, you can't re-aim anymore. It's gone too far. And so Micah is really about like, you guys have lost the plot completely. And because you've lost the plot completely, I can't let you stay in the land anymore. I will go with you to exile. I want to help rebuild something, but we can't rebuild something here anymore. And so it's pretty strong language in Micah of like, you're going to lose this land. It's too late. And so then the court case is like, well, why would we lose the land? What have we done wrong? What do you want from us, God? And God saying, I've already shown you what I want from you and you're not doing it. This shouldn't be a mystery. Like, remember the story of liberation and remember the way that you're supposed to live with mercy. And so that becomes this conversation for us of how do we bring that forward when we just want to think of God. Of all people, I'm thinking about Paul. That always makes me, but like, and Paul, in Romans, when Paul says like, what should we go on sinning so that grace may increase? Like there is a way that we want God to always forgive in a way that never has consequences. And the prophets are saying, I do forgive you, but that doesn't mean there's no consequences. I am still with you, but you're going to lose some things here because there has to be consequences for how you have abused your power. And I still love you.
And I think like a good court case, you use the argument of the opposition to actually be in your favor, right? You take their testimony and then you say, okay, you said this and you're actually making an argument for me. And here's why. And you explain why. When they say, well, what do you really want? Do you want all these rams? Do you want all these things? Do you want these rivers of oil? And in a way, it's like saying, okay, God, what do you want? Like we could see maybe a question there or a longing in there. But what you could also see is they have missed the plot so badly that they literally are still in a transactional relationship that they think they can buy their way back. That's how far away they are. They're like, well, what do you want? Rivers of this stuff? Like herds of this? Like, it's like, oh my gosh, you are so far off like the path that you're just taking the transactional nature of religion and multiplying it by 100, as opposed to saying maybe transactional religion is not the answer. Like maybe humility and saying, what got us liberated in the beginning?
But we also we want it to be the thing. I feel like it's the nature of humanity that we want like some sort of transactional rules.
1,000%.
Like we would like these things to like, it is really, 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 really hard to understand mercy and justice, especially if we're thinking about biblically. It is really hard to wrap our heads around like, this isn't about what you've done. Like I chose you and I freed you because I loved you.
Okay.
Not because you were so good. And in this situation, like it's not that you're not doing the stuff that I like that you think is required of you. You've missed what's required of you. What is required of you is to be a good human.
Right. So
Do the like that's
which
like,
I'm going to read
like
Micah 2 too, because so Micah 1 talks about like graven images. So that's a part of it. Like you're worshiping other gods. But I think part of recognizing where that's coming from in Hebrew is to recognize why people worshipped other gods, which was about prosperity. They weren't thinking, gosh, this gold statue is so cool. I'm really drawn into this gold statue. It was because somebody told them that worshiping that gold statue would give them a better crop, which would give them more income. It's about power and wealth. It's always about power and wealth. That's the reason you pick a different graven image. And in chapter 2, verse 2, it talks about how they covet fields and take them by violence and houses. They oppress a man in his house, a man in his heritage. So it's calling out that people are stealing from each other. They're stealing land. They're stealing crops. Like you're not doing this. You're oppressing people. Woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds. When morning is light, they practice it because it is the power of their hand. Like this is about coveting and power and oppression and the way that the people have lost the plot of what the land was for in the first place.
And I think to Lisa's point, like, yes, as humans, we always want a transaction in order to get out of the crap that we're in. That's incredibly human. However, the best of being human, when the dust and the divine are together, is actually transformational, which requires humility. I think that I'm a really good dad. I love my kids to the moon and back, right? Like, oh, it's so cute, right? I think I'm a really good dad. I am currently in a situation where I am losing my patience on a routine basis to the point where I needed a mirror, not a mirror in linguistic Hebrew language, but I needed someone to say, do you know how you're coming across? And the answer was, really? No, I don't think so. And I wanted to be able to just continue parenting the way that I parent because I'm good at it. But the reality was I needed a slice of humble pie, an honest pie, to say there's a transformation that needs to happen and I can't just do it on my own. I actually probably need to go to therapy. I have something that needs to be healed or changed or addressed in order to actually show up as I think I can or should or am. That's transformational, and it requires like something more than just, I'll just work a little bit harder. I'll just muscle my way through it. They'll be fine. Like, no, you could do real damage to your relationship with your kids if you think it'll just be fine is the answer. And I feel like that's Israel's argument. It'll just be fine. We'll just get more oil. We'll just get more rams. It'll be fine. And it's like, no, you missed the boat. It's not going to be fine. You've done irreparable harm, and now it's time for something different. It's justice. It's loving kindness, right? Which is that chesed, right? So I wish there was a transaction to healthy parenting. But all the Dr. Becky videos in the world won't actually make a change unless I do the hard work.
Which I feel like you're hitting at something so important about owning. Like one of the other critiques that God has in Micah is of the rulers, and that the rulers have lost the plot. And how much as humans, this just feels very modern to me. Like we think, well, we must be doing okay because my ruler says it's okay. My pastor says this is this is who we should vote for. So, or my pastor says whatever. And so we don't own our own choices and own our own living out of justice because we trust leaders to be just, but like in Micah 3 earlier, that's specifically who God calls out. Hear, O heads of Jacob, O princes of Israel, is it not for you to know judgment, which is going to be the word that comes back into play in Micah 6:8 of justice, judgment. Isn't it your job to know justice? But you hate the good and love the evil. And then it gets really graphic. You pluck off skin from them, you pluck off the skin and bones of the people. You break them into pieces and put them in the cauldron. So God is calling out the leaders in particular as having lost justice and loving evil instead of good. And how much then are the people just being like, well, this is how I'm supposed to parent because somebody told me that, as compared to that self-evaluation of like, oh, wait a second, but I know in my heart what God said to do, and this isn't it. My leader might be wrong.
Yeah. Or it feels like the, maybe another angle of it is like, God is addressing the leaders. You got work to do though. Like God's taking care of that thing. You have work to do to make sure that you are following into that. Like, you're just not off the hook of, I don't know. It's not even on the hook though.
Yeah, well, but it feels like it's some of that context to the court case of like God's already called out the leaders earlier in Micah, and now the court case is against all the people. So the people could easily be like, hey, but it was my leader's fault. So can I just give a couple offerings to make it better? And God's like, no. I have already shown you, all humans, what you're supposed to be doing. You got to do that. Everybody's got to do that. It's about everybody.
Yeah, he doesn't let people off the hook because there's a sense of like the leaders have messed up and now the mountains are going to testify to all the people about what's been really going on. And the mountain language is interesting because I would imagine that could give us a little reference point to when else were the people drawn to a mountain, right? And you go to Mount Sinai where they're all invited up the mountain, but then they're like, heck no, Moses, you go, right? Like we don't dare go up there. They've been to the mountain before, and this isn't an unfamiliar place for them to be addressed. And here they are again. And they relied upon a leader, and God's going to point that out. I gave you Moses. You didn't want to come up here the first time. I gave you Moses and Miriam and Aaron. Now here you are again. Your leaders have messed this up, led you astray. Okay. All right, you mortals. What are you going to do about it? Right?
But I also feel like there is something, I remember like the first time I kind of thought about this passage and thinking about the mountains as bearing witness. And it's actually this really deep reminder. I remember like we went on I'm not going to remember the actual word for it. A sacred sites tour with Tim Jacob. And he introduced us, like you begin and meet at a tree that is really old and sacred. And not all of them survived, but like this one has survived. And like, if you think about the things that a tree has witnessed, like all the building of like highways and in this particular setting, we're talking about like bearing witness to the way that in Minnesota, indigenous folks were housed in internment camps on their most sacred soil. Like that, like nature witnesses the atrocities of humanity time and time and time again. Like it will be around longer than us. It came around before us. And like to have a witness to your behavior means like you don't really have wiggle room to say like, well, that didn't happen. Not my fault. Like a witness is I just think it's really interesting that creation is the thing that's going to testify our behaviors. And it is the thing that we are introduced to in the very beginning of like, how do you care for creation? So even at the baseline of like, what are you doing? Like you forgot that everything is watching you. Like everything is actually impacted by the way that you do things. And to think about like, we think about like jury of our peers, but a jury of something that has withstood us like time and has like witnessed a whole bunch of things. What does that actually do for us in like how we even want to argue a case?
Well, and to your point, Lisa, not to highlight Paul again, because I know he's one of our questionable characters.
We just
Fine.
always have to roll our eyes a little bit, and it's fine.
But
Paul's
like
in the Bible too.
Paul is building an argument all throughout the book of Romans, and then in Romans 8, he gets to the point of being like, creation is groaning as in the pangs of childbirth, waiting for humanity to like show up, to like do what it's supposed to do. Like, again, testifying, witnessing what's really going on here. And so if we're looking for threads throughout scripture, if the assignment hasn't changed, one of the threads throughout scripture, one of the assignments is that creation itself is witnessing to the role that humanity plays on this earth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, humanity's given responsibility to tend and to guard or to have dominion, right? And to conquer the earth. Which one is it? Are you going to tend and guard it? It's going to be a witness to the instruction of the Lord. It's going to be a witness to the justice that God desires for people to have. It's going to be waiting in anticipation for humanity to show up and be what it's supposed to be. Like, it's a beautiful through line to see the way creation witnesses the role of humanity.
The other through line, there's several through lines in Micah 6. That's why we're here. So we're thinking about the assignment not changing. That like creation is a part of it. We're going to talk about this, but in verse 8, the reason it says mortals, it's using Adam, like the human in Genesis 1 and 2. And so we're going to go back to that and the idea that like, what is it to go back to creation, how we were made and what we were made for? And also, what is it to always remember this testimony of the Hebrew scriptures, to always remember that the people were liberated from slavery to an empire as a core of who God is and how God's calling us to live. Like, that's what he's bringing them back to in this moment, is like, remember your liberation. In Leviticus 19, love the stranger as you love yourself, because you were once strangers in Egypt. You know what it was to be a refugee. Live like that. And so that once again, God here is calling the people back. Remember that you were enslaved and I freed you and I gave you Moses, Miriam, and Aaron. And I kept you from, at that point. So that redemption is in verse 4. Verse 5 is also remembering that I helped you cross over from that into this land in the first place. So the protection from Balak and Balaam, can listen back to that episode. It's like in season 1, I think, that we talked about them. But that's really at the point of crossing over to the land for the first time, that God protected the people from that threat. And from Shittim to Gilgal is about the crossing itself. That's both sides of the river. I helped you cross here. I liberated you. I led you in the wilderness and I helped you make this crossing. And now you have utterly destroyed and abused this land that I gave you. And so let's go back to that moment of me taking you on that journey, bringing you to the crossover, and like think about how you've abused that land and what does it go back to before that point, and to allow creation to be a part of that witness and to remember who you really are. And so then by the time we get to verse 8, God's like, okay, because then the people are like, okay, do you just want more offerings, whatever? And God's like, okay, apparently we have to go back to Genesis actually. And so verse
how do we
8,
go back to Genesis? We go back to Genesis with the Adam, right? The human one, the mortal. I think the altered translation said, "Oh man," but a better translation might be the human one or the mortal, right? Because it's not. I mean, in Genesis, it's not gendered until later, and so we're talking about genderless humanity.
Yeah, or genderful is another way to think about it.
Yeah, there you go. That's better.
So
like that.
the way to think about Adam, I mean, it's a whole nother. I think have we done an episode on Adam? But the short way to think about it is that in Genesis 2:7, God sculpts the Adam from the Adamah. So the human, the earthling, is sculpted from the earth, and in Hebrew, you really hear the Adam comes from the Adamah. So even the fact that the word for humanity or mortal is connected to the word for the earth and being sculpted out of the earth is this call to always remember that we are, the breath of God is what brings us life, but the soil of the earth is also what brings us life, that humans are always both divine and earth creatures. And like the Adam is supposed to key us into that and how we're supposed to live in connection to the earth and in connection to the divine. Like this is the word for that.
And isn't
So
there
you
also another connection to Genesis? What does the Lord require but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? Is there other connections to that early part of Genesis?
Yeah, I wonder if it's time to just really start digging into verse 8. Or if we,
Do it. Let's go.
um, so so first is this sort of my translation says, like, God has shown you, O Adam, what is good. The shown is negad, which is like to make conspicuous. Like, I think that's worth pausing on, just to say, like, the language here is like, this should be obvious to you. It's not obvious, so I'm going to say it anyway, but like, I shouldn't even have to say this. God's already made conspicuous to you, O human, what tov is. So that's our next connection to Genesis. What is good? Question mark. What is tov? Question mark. We've talked about tov. Like, so if we're thinking about what is tov, we go back to Genesis 1. Like, what's tov in Genesis 1? This, how that's being seen at the end of a day of creation. And then what does the living presence require of you is also, that's derash, which is to seek. What is God seeking from you? Looking for from you? And then, so that's another question mark. And then, what is good? Question mark. What is God seeking from you? Question mark. Then we have the answer: to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And so do justice, the word is asa, which is to create or make justice. So this is, again, a word from Genesis 1. God made the firmament. God made fruit that made trees that made fruit. God made two great lights, asa. So it's to make or accomplish or fashion. And so this idea, it's not just, there's something there to unpack of, like, we are making and fashioning and doing justice. What does that actually mean that is being asked of us? We're loving, ahav, chesed, which we've talked about here before, mercy, loving kindness, this faithful commitment to other humans that's not based on their action. And then we're also walking humbly. And so there's a lot to unpack in all of that. I don't know where we want to go.
So much to unpack. You left like 8 question marks. That was amazing. One that I want to highlight really quick, and then we can move on to others, because I'm sure we have a bunch to talk about, not a lot of time here. The idea of create. When you think about a people that are transactional, oftentimes one of the responses is, well, I just followed the rules. I just did what was expected of me. So why are you so mad? Okay, sure, totally get that if that's the type of established relationship we have. But if my standard is not just follow the rules, but if it's to be a just person, if the rules aren't just, following the rules doesn't actually accomplish anything. You might need to create something new in order for justice to happen. And I'm going to be Lisa for a minute and say, abolishing the unjust prison system that is working to enrich the pockets of countries and private equity and all these other things, including shareholders like me, I'm guessing. I don't know where all my stocks have stock, whatever, but like, there are so many people profiting from prisons, and it's not the people that are supposed to be trying to learn and grow so that they can re-enter society. That's true. So abolishing it means that following the rules isn't working. It needs to be done with so that justice can actually happen. Be creative, like Asa, right? Not, well, we just followed the rule. We just obeyed the law. That's what the precedent for the courts is. Okay, yeah, but the courts are not always right. That's why we have new laws and new bills and new systems, because the old ones were hurting the wrong people or profiting only certain people. How'd I do, Lisa?
I'll give it to you. You
B
can go.
minus? I'll give it to you. Is that what you said?
It's the tension. It's the tension of not just being just, right? Because I think that's what we want. We want to be just.
Mm.
Like, and that's that's not on the table.
And it's not really enough. So this is where I think about the connection to like the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus saying, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after justice." Sometimes our translations say righteousness, but I would just take you to the work of, what is his name? Nicholas, I can't remember. But anyway, he points out that the word there, dikaiosune, in Plato's Republic is always translated as justice, and in our Bibles is often translated as righteousness, and that has bias in the commentators' part. So I am going to choose to follow that guidance
Not
and
the
say
commentators' part. It has bias in
the
in
translators' part. Yeah.
Right. Which is
so every time it says
misleading.
righteousness in the New Testament, it should say justice, and see how it affects how you read it. So blessed are those who hunger and thirst after justice says it's not enough to follow the rules. You should thirst after the justice that's not here. You should hunger for the justice you don't see. And then in Micah 6:8, you should make the justice that isn't here. You should fashion something better. Don't just be satisfied with what is. Make it, create it, thirst after it, hunger for it. Like, you have a role to play to make this earth more just through the way you live your life. Create it.
And I love the metaphor of hungering and thirsting, because one meal isn't enough for a lifetime. One glass of water doesn't satisfy for a lifetime. It's something you're going to have to keep evaluating, keep coming back to, keep at it. It's an ongoing relationality. It's not just a one-time thing. It's not satisfy your hunger for justice as if you can. It's hunger after this. Like a human hungers after food forever, right? Like,
yeah, I wish Alter would have said create justice, because I think that gets at that better in 6:8. And it is a word that you could use, the word create or fashion. And it has this ongoing struggle and action to it of like, that means I have to look for where it's not and bring it.
But I do appreciate, at least it's better than be just.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It is do. It's not just be.
Like, because doing justice does imply an ongoing nature. Like, you need to keep doing this. I mean, create would be much better, but be is what we typically want what we want.
Yeah, that's a good point. Either way, it's not just rest on your laurels and follow the rules. Make something better. It's like, it reminds me of like, leave things better than how you found them. You know, like that idea of like cleanliness that is on many of our cultural upbringings of like, what if our role as humans is to leave the earth better than we found it, which includes putting justice in places that haven't been just before, so that it's better than what we entered.
When you say it like that, it feels like a no duh. Like, we want to leave the world better than the way we found it. Yeah. That's like what every generation should be saying. And yet that's typically not how we act. We all believe that's the right thing, but we don't act that way. We act like, I'm just here to get what I can, as opposed to, how can I use the little bit of time that I have to make a little bit more justice? And let's not make it more just for all of us that have a lot, because that's not just. It's got to be for those that need liberation, right? Let's point back to where this conversation started. I freed you from slavery and gave you liberation, right? Like, that's who the good news needs to be for. If it's not for the prisoner, the slave, the marginalized, the oppressed, then it's not good news. And so go do just. Make the world a more just place before you go. But make sure you do it for the right people.
Well, that goes to the like love mercy is love chesed. So love, I mean, the first use of love in scripture is like Genesis 22, take your son, your only son who you love. So this is a commitment word. And so love, that kind of love, should be towards this idea of chesed, which is a loving kindness, a mercy, a being with, that is about the other person not deserving it because they do something, but because they're human, that you're with them, you're committed to their well-being. You're Ruth going with Naomi to her land. You know, we've talked about her being described as chesed on this podcast before. And so I just think about that embodiment of it, of she was willing to upend her life for the sake of somebody else because she was living out chesed. And so how do we love that? How do we have that commitment to that way of being in the world?
I also think these are not standalone options. They all have to be done together.
Mm.
In the way, like, it's not you can't check mark that, like, oh, I have done justice. I have done hesed. Like, they're not those, they're the ways that you actually move in the world
Mm.
and like how you're centered on things. And so like you can't do the justice side of things without having the hesed and the humility, which is directly connected to God, right? Because if you're walking humbly with God, like it's this natural way of these forces like working together and how they kind of check each other. Because sometimes in the Hesed world, we might be more likely to do something that like harms people instead of like actually holding them to justice. Right? Like, because there is, even as we're talking about, like we've named that there are consequences. It's not just a space of like everything's good, everything's like that. That's not what this is. It is there has to be some justice to it. There has to be that loving kindness and humility. Like all those things are what make it work together.
Yeah.
Because if you come in shouting, I'm right, you're wrong. And you just need to be just and love people. If that is like, it's a good message. It's true. But also you can't come in with that energy because that's not the right energy for it either. And I'm sure it's more than energy. Like humility is, it's difficult work. And it's something that, I mean, I remember like it's these things where like all of a sudden you're like, oh, that makes sense now. Like humility didn't feel real strange to me until somebody talked about like, well, oftentimes you get humiliated in order to experience humility. And then I was like, oh. And like, in what scenarios did I feel humiliation and how was that connected to humility?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good.
Or somebody else's lack of humility, and that's why I was humiliated. Like,
well, you felt a sense of empathy because you were witnessing their humiliation and were like, oh man,
yeah.
I can imagine how that must feel. I don't want to feel that way. Oh wait, am I that way? Right? Little humble pie here might go a long way. You know, there's a part of me that I would never discount what you just said or disagree with you that like having a level of humility or not wanting to be like I'm right, like do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God or else, like it's not like but at the same time there is a little bit of like I don't want to say sarcasm in this passage, but when it's like it's a little bit like, hey, yo mortal, let me put it plainly for you because apparently you don't get it. This isn't a mystery what God has been up to here. And I know it's maybe not sarcasm. I'm way reading that into it. But there is a little bit of like, I'm going to put this so plainly that you can't miss it now. That I almost wonder if we do need to be not I'm right, you're wrong, but like a little explicit. Like, okay, we know that greed is wrong, right? Like, we know that profiting off the backs of people that don't have anything is not good. Can we agree on that, please? Like, can we just agree that exploiting people because they weren't born into privilege isn't healthy? Both for them, obviously, but then also for our own souls? Like, can we just agree with that and then figure out what to do now?
Well, that's I think where the humility isn't by itself. It's walking humbly with God. So there's a way that if we're walking humbly with God, then what we are saying is, I am moving through the world with God. And to move through the world with God humbly says, I'm moving through the world knowing I am not God, knowing that I need a learner mindset and learning from God as I move through the world. And so that might mean that sometimes I do feel strongly about something because I see that God feels strongly about it. So I don't think humility means I never take a stance on anything. I think it means that I understand my place, and that I'm not grabbing for power that's not mine. I'm not pretending I know more than I do. That's part of then what allows me to create justice and to love chesed, because I've positioned myself correctly in the order of the things.
I feel like, and maybe our modern political times, and I know that sometimes I make this podcast too political for some people. No, actually, I don't. I've never heard that. I probably, who knows? But like, I feel like there's a level of, like, when we cut USAID and all this treatment for people that have HIV or AIDS just gets flushed down the toilet. And Elon Musk tweets out, "No one's died because we paused USAID." And then just some simple reporting from people that just go to Africa and go to these clinics where they used to have supplies. And they ask the question, has anyone died because they haven't received treatment? And it's like, yeah, there was a 10-year-old boy who got pneumonia like 2 weeks after because his immune system was compromised because he didn't get his medication, and he's no longer with us. Or this mom and her children who were all infected with HIV also passed away. Like, it's not hard to find these stories that combat it. And part of me is like, can we not agree that this medicine that Congress has approved the spending for needed to get into the hands of the people that need it the most? Like, hello, like, can we just agree on that? Like, that's the kind of thing that I want to still be able to say. And I think what I hear you saying is like, yeah, maybe there's still room for that. And it's okay to have a learner's mentality to say, and also the government may have been a little bloated and maybe we need to evaluate our spending plans. Like, that's okay to say too. Like, we don't need to be like, it's all perfect, but we also don't need to say we should just, everything they're doing is perfectly fine. Like, it can't just be one or the other.
Well, I think the combination of walking humbly and loving mercy and making justice pushes us to think in color and not black and white. And it pushes us to wrestle, not have answers. So one of the things that I see politically is people overly villainize in a way that doesn't see the complexity of a situation and what the solution actually is. So, for instance, I listened to a podcast that really blames the rise of authoritarianism on Democrats. And it was an important piece of the conversation as we're talking about politics, to say, like, the nuance then is a part of what this verse is inviting us into, the nuance of politics, but the nuance of faith, the nuance of how we live, to say, like, how do I and how do we create justice that's different than how do we follow the ideology of a particular political party, or how are we against or for things? It's saying, okay, let's take it beyond what we're against and what we're for into what can I do to make the world more just? What can we do to have a kind of loving commitment to people and live in proximity to people who need that chesed? What can we do to keep a learner's mentality for how God is calling us to respond to these times, which is probably something more than political party. It's probably something just that we haven't even imagined yet, because humility would say, I don't know what I don't know. And I'm going to walk with God towards what we can solve. And, there is just an unknown and a wrestle to it, and also a call to action in it, that I think pushes us to not be able to have ideological stances in quite the same way. It's more action oriented than that.
I want to say yes, and like, I think the part that bothers me, and I don't have a good solution to this. And if you're not watching this on YouTube, which I think only one person does, I'm like, my hands are behind my head and I'm looking exasperated. This passage starts out with calling people to the mountains, letting the mountains hear the testimony and then judge about what is going on. And I feel like in our modern times, we're asked to have like, hey, get busy doing the work. And it's like what? Like send a letter to my congressperson? Like, cool. I've done that multiple times. It's, get more involved in local elections. Cool. Can do that. It's give to your local food shelf. There's lots of little pieces and none of that's wrong. I encourage people to do that. But there's a part of me that's like, is anyone going to say to the church, you're at the base of the mountain and the mountains are testifying that you are doing shit to make this world more just. You are so uncreative. You are so led by your leaders to do the wrong thing and to harm the least of these that you are literally killing creation. You're at the mountain and they're testifying. Like, this is where it's at. Like, who's saying that? Who's saying that? Like, are we the only ones? I got like 80 people on a Sunday. Big whoop. Like, that's not a lot of people. Like, someone needs a megaphone and to be like, ugh. It needs to be bigger. I know it can't be.
Okay,
and I know it's grassroots and I know it's all these little things, but it's like, when is someone going to stand up in the U.S. Congress and be like, we are at the foot of the mountain and the mountains are testifying that we have misled everybody and this is hogwash. And I like, make it religious, make it biblical, make it spiritual, stop being political. Like, this is about the soul of humanity. This is about everything. Like,
okay. I don't know that I want Congress to be more spiritual. Like, I want to be careful with that request.
Well, yeah.
But I think that there's,
but you wouldn't want Dr. King to be less spiritual. That's like my point. And like, he was super political and super spiritual.
But here's the problem.
Go together.
But this is the problem. We're still looking for a person to like pull us all together and do this magic trick. And we are seeing on one side, there is one person pulling everybody together and doing a magic trick.
Yeah, but
the answer is not to have another person to do that.
Aaron, like God gave them Moses and Miriam and Aaron and didn't say you shouldn't need them anymore.
But people just want a Moses. They don't even want to see Aaron and Miriam.
Yes, and they needed a Jesus and they needed a Paul and they needed people need a pastor. Like, I'm not trying to advocate just.
But do you hear this, like this individual nature of like a pastor, like these singular people. And the thing is like, it is the activities of it's the activities of the people that actually matter.
I think the people have to hold their leadership accountable.
Yes.
I don't think leaderless existence is the pinnacle of humanity. I don't know if that's where, maybe it is. Maybe that is the great hope of humanity.
No, this verse doesn't say it's, but the verse would say, I have a bias towards co-leadership because Lisa and I co-lead 40 orchards.
We like that.
Here we are with Jason, the chair of our board. So we have shared leadership. But I do think that that's an interesting piece of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam being mentioned here is you're looking to have a king who tells you what to do and to follow that king. That's never been the way. I gave you Moses to free you from the people. I gave you Aaron to establish the priesthood. I gave you Miriam to be the first prophet. You needed a prophet and a priest and a king, and you still do. Look to multitude of voices to lead you and walk humbly with God while you do. And take ownership of your individual actions while you do, because in a rare scenario here in verse 8, it's singular. It's you singular. Usually it's you plural, but it's like you are an Adam. Every single one of you are an earthling made from the earth. You, earthling, do these things. Every earthling should do these things. If every earthling does these things and looks to communal leadership and walks humbly with God, then we start to have a different story. But it's got to start with me, and it's got to start it just starts painfully smaller than we want it to start.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're not going to be given a rescuer in the same way that we maybe are hoping for.
Mm.
I mean, yes and no. Like, I love this. I love this shared leadership thing. But like, you still had the prophet doing the work, right? You still had Micah showing up and saying, like, here's what the Lord says, right? Like, and there were other prophets at the same time, and there were other leaders, and sometimes there was a good king that listened to the prophet and listened to the priest, and they did work together, and the nation thrived even before it went into exile. So like, there is room for that to work in a healthy, balanced way.
I mean, but there's the weird challenge that we're navigating is that we're talking about a land where that, like, we are not apples to apples. We are apples to, like, way orangey, for multiple different reasons.
Of course, we're not in a theocracy,
right.
We're in a democracy, all that. Yeah.
Like, what if we just thought about our county of living? And like, that even feels more digestible to me, of like, okay, what work can I do inside the county or even my city where I live? What are the things here that do not look just, that do not seem right? Where like, really, I can lean into what it means to do loving kindness and mercy. Like, the thing, it's never been a set of rules that's an easy checklist. I mean, I think even like our Jewish rabbis would tell us, it's not like it's necessarily an easy checklist, otherwise we'd be done. Like, the work is always evolving, and it is so tied to like who we are and who we're in relationship to. Like, that's how you know who you are. Who are the most vulnerable in my city? Do I know the answer to that question? Do I know who they are and where they're located and why that's happening and how they got there and how that came about? If I don't know those things, that's probably my next step. If that feels even too big, I can just go like, on my street. Who is, like, am I the most vulnerable person on my street? Where do I have need? And where does somebody else have need? And what does that actually like look like in a neighborhood? There's like, the big stuff gets so big and so hard because it is so big and so hard. That is why we want a person to come and like rally everything and fix it. But that's just never been the case. And as we continue to find, like, everything is nuanced, like, people losing their job impacts different communities differently. If your community is around one particular type of like occupation, and that occupation goes away, you're going to have a very different experience than if you like, oh, it's a small little business, it got shut down. Like, we got a food shelf for you guys. That's fine. Come over. I just think that there is something to be said for like, if you actually own your thing here, that then the natural play out like spreads. Because if everybody's doing it, you're doing
I would say that's another through line, and as we're thinking about the assignment hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Is no matter where we are in scripture, God isn't taking down the empires, actually.
Yeah.
God is calling people to live differently inside the political systems of the world, and knowing that those small changes make an incremental difference. And that's a hard through line. I don't want that to be true. But when God frees people from Egypt, he doesn't destroy Egypt. He just frees the people from Egypt.
Or give them Egypt in return, because it's a pretty nice place to be. Yeah. Like, what doesn't happen is the people don't get Egypt.
Yes.
They don't get that.
They don't get that. When Jesus comes, Jesus doesn't free people from the Roman Empire or take down the Roman Empire. Jesus gives people a different way to live inside of the Roman Empire. Even in establishing the land, which Micah is talking about, it's this little strip of land surrounded by empires, and it's calling people, be different, surrounded by the empires. Don't live like the empires do. But God isn't actually saying, here's how you take down Assyria. Here's how you take down Babylon. Here's how you take down Egypt. It's, no, just live differently here and let that trickle out to make a difference to those people around you. And even as I say this, I'm throwing up a little bit in my mouth. I want the message to be different than that. But it is a through line of living differently in your neighborhood, in your city, in your county, in your state matters. Think smaller in order for the bigger to happen through the ripple effects of that.
Okay, I agree 100% with all that. 1,000%. But I think you ask us all the time, put yourself in the story, put yourself in the story, put yourself in the story. Okay, I cannot put myself as a persecuted Jewish person in the first century with Jesus walking around saying, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. Because I am that person's enemy. Like, I'm the Roman citizen occupying land that's not mine. I am the Roman citizen who has access to the power. So the question for me isn't, what would Jesus do? It's not what would Jesus encourage the marginalized and those with barely any power do. It's what would Jesus call the Roman citizens to do? Like, that's the question. Like, if the Roman citizens were following the way of Christ, if they were trying to enact and create and do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with God, what would they have done? Now, they had a Caesar, not a democracy, but man, we are much closer to having a Caesar now than we were 4 years ago or 2 years ago. What are we going to do if we're the Roman citizens, but we're followers of Jesus? That's my question.
Well,
maybe it is the same answer.
I think God has told you, O earthling, what is Tov? What does God seek from you? God seeks from you
Shut up, Steph.
to create and make justice where there is not justice. And God asks of you to love chesed and be committed to the mercy and the witness to the people around you. And God asks you to walk humbly with God each step of the way. May it be so.
Are you ending the podcast?
Yes, she is.
Yeah, you are. Love it. Until next time, everybody. Have a good one. This has been a 40 Orchards podcast. At 40 Orchards, our mission is to create circles for all people to wrestle through biblical text so that together we can expand each other's experience of what is sacred, whole, and good. We search through the lens of sacred possibility, assuming there is more to be discovered, questioned, and applied as we listen for how God is still speaking. You can learn more about 40 Orchards and sign up for a study by going to 40, that's 40orchards.org. Our opening music is by Les FM. Our closing music is by NCR Music Vibes. Additional music is by 3 Music. Any references to books or other sources can be found in the show notes of this episode. Thank you for searching the sacred.